So I wanted to talk to you about integrating sources because that is a skill that is essential for academic writing. Academic writing is just not valid without sources. Again, I'm sure you've heard this before, but people want to hear your opinion more if they know that you have read and that you're educated. And this might not be the entire world, but it is a big chunk of the world who feels that way, and especially in academics. So there is a PDF that you can download, and if you read through that PDF while I'm talking, I'm kind of guiding you through it a little bit. I definitely stole it from another teacher, Miranda Egger, who is very, very smart. But the PDF will guide you a little bit. So integrating sources is a really common skill, and all of you have some of these skills under your belt because I've seen them. The idea is that you're using sources in your own work, so you're integrating it into your work. The sources still stand separate, and so you're citing them and you're referencing them, okay? You're incorporating their ideas into your writing in a way that shows that you understand what they said and that you're building on their ideas, and you're entering into that conversation with people who know what you're talking about. Something to remember is that working on this skill is so important because it is a rhetorical choice you make as to when and how you incorporate other people's ideas into your writing. And that choice is going to influence how you persuade others to believe what you believe, and also how you appear to others, okay? Your argument will be more effective if you're doing a thoughtful, careful job of integrating sources. So there are, four major ways to integrate sources. You can mention a source. So you're not even citing it, you're just saying, see blah, blah, blah. And this happens a lot in APA papers, like natural and social sciences, because they expect you to be diving into the research too. So they will just point you that way. Then you can also paraphrase what a source has said. And I'm sure you've worked on paraphrasing before. The important thing with paraphrasing is don't patch write, okay? Don't do it. Paraphrase without looking at the source. So you're not copying the patterns and the words from the source, but you're actually restating it in your own words, but focusing on what they said very closely and carefully so that you're doing justice to what they actually said. You can quote directly, and when in doubt, do it. Use quotation marks. Make sure you use parenthetical references, in-text citations, whichever you want to call it. And make sure you watch the punctuation around the quotation, and make sure that you quote carefully, because it's also plagiarism to leave words out and leave out chunks from a quotation. So do it carefully and thoughtfully. And there are many guides online that help you with this. And I think I've probably put a few resources up for this as well. But quoting directly is very useful. And then there's summarizing. And I'm going to have another video about what I call assimilation, and summarizing is doing that as well. You're summarizing the main points of this person's argument, and we've worked on that. And it's hard. It's a really hard skill to master because you have to decide what's relevant, and you have to decide what's important, and you still have to do justice to their argument, and you can't plagiarize. So it is a hard skill to master, but it is extremely valuable in your writing to be able to summarize someone carefully, which is why we started with it in this class, and you probably practiced it in English 1020 as well. It's hard, and you're going to do it all the time. So those are the four ways to integrate sources. There are three ideas to keep in mind as you integrate sources, and these will guide you in your decisions, okay? The first one is to quote concisely. You do not want your paper to just be a bunch of quotes from other people, because then it's not your paper. It is just your curated selection of other people's ideas. And curation is very cool. I love museums as much as anyone else. I love being guided through ideas, but it is not integrating sources, and it's not you writing your paper. The general rule is that your paper should be at least 80% your writing and only 20% actual quotations or integrated sources, because it's your voice. You don't want other people telling people about this argument. You want to tell them about this argument. And so you use the sources that support your ideas, and you use them carefully. Something to consider about this is that sometimes I hear people say, oh, but they said it so much better than me. And that's just not really true, because your argument is different than theirs. And yeah, they might have said a certain point in a great way, but it's not exactly your argument. And so the way you say it matters as well. So if you really think they said it perfectly, then sure, take that quote and put it directly in there in quotation marks. But just remember that you don't want to do huge quotes. Just take that phrase, or just take that one sentence where they said it perfectly, and then analyze it and explain it in your words and how it relates to your idea. Another thing to remember about this, and I'll mention it later as well, is that rhetorically, it's not a good idea to start or end paragraphs with quotations, because that means that you haven't explained them and you haven't related them to your ideas and your matter. If you start a paragraph with a quotation, you're not providing us with a topic sentence, and so we are not sure exactly what that paragraph is about. And if you end a paragraph with a quotation, you're not giving yourself room to explain that quotation or analyze that quotation and show how it relates to your argument either. It leaves the reader hanging, and it leaves them without your voice ringing in their head, which is what you want. You want your voice all over the place because it's your paper. Okay, that was the first idea about integration. The second idea about integration is to be very, very clear about who is speaking, because as you're using multiple sources and as you're using your own ideas, you can easily get lost in whose ideas they are. So if you're quoting someone and saying, Professor XYZ claims that taking care of your dog matters for your mental health, and then you keep going on and you say, it is essential that dogs and owners take walks. I know this is not a good example, but in that second sentence, whose idea is that? Is it Professor XYZ's? Is it yours? Are you continuing to paraphrase Professor XYZ, or have you inserted your voice? And so there are lots of little ways to make sure and be clear about who's speaking. In the first sentence, it was totally obvious that Professor XYZ believes this, but in the second sentence, add a phrase to let us know that this is your idea or it's still his idea. And these are they're called a bunch of different things. You may have heard them called signal phrases. They signal who's speaking or what's going on. Or they might also be called attributive tags, which is the fancy academic way to talk about who the source is attributed to. And so use them constantly, and there are many lists of them. But there are things like, according to, this person also asserts, in my own opinion, or as I was thinking about this, I realized. It's a good place to use I, because it's clear that it's you who's saying something as opposed to someone else. But add those. Another little hint with this, when you're being clear about who is talking, is if your source is distinctive in some way. If it's a professor of sociology and you're writing about a sociology idea, mention that in there. As Professor XYZ, who is a sociologist and wrote the book blah, 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 comma, and then start your quotation, because that adds ethos and validity to your paper, and it lets the reader, it gives them a little background information. You might know all about this person, but your reader might not. And so if it matters, let them know. Okay, moving on to the third major idea having to do with integrating sources is always make sure that you are being very clear about how the source relates to your argument. It is so important. I'm trying to point to the camera. It is so important that you make this clear. And if you look at paragraph structure with meal and peel, you will see that this is built into it. So whenever you have a source and whenever you use it, whether you paraphrase, whether you quote directly, especially when you quote directly, whether you summarize, add explanation and add analysis that brings us back to your argument. So we're very, very clear about how this source relates to your ideas. And that ensures that your voice and your ideas stay above and very clear in the reader's head, okay? This also matters with dumping quotes. I always imagine, I wish I could do animations. Kevin, you're gonna have to do an animation for me. Sometimes I read a paper and there's no signal phrase and no attributive tag, and there's just quote with after a quote after quote. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I imagine bombs of quotes just dumping into the middle of the paper and exploding there. And I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how it relates. I don't have any way to think about it. And so make sure you don't drop quotes in without connecting them and explaining how they relate and why you chose them. Show the connection. Make sure I didn't. Cool. Okay, make sure I didn't forget anything. So that's it. So think about those 4 ways of integrating quotations. Making that choice about how you integrate a quotation is very important, but remember, don't let it take over your voice. Quote concisely and make sure that your voice reigns supreme in your paper. Always be clear about who's speaking. Make sure that it's totally clear. It might be totally clear to you as you write it, but make sure it's clear to the reader, which is another reason that we have readers peer reviewing our work. And I hope you have other readers reading your work as well. And then always make very, very clear how any sources used relate directly to your argument. Think about how we showed why sources matter in our annotated bibliography. Do that continuously through your paper. And you can sometimes do it through a phrase, sometimes through a sentence. It doesn't take a lot. And once it becomes a habit, it's really great. But this is just one of those essential skills that you need for writing.